It's November 7th of 2021. The global pandemic is finally starting to fade away. The 2021 Olympic season is quickly coming to a close. However, in one key race taking place in New York City, a very special kind of history was made. This is the New York City Marathon, one of the biggest marathons in the entire world, and it's one of the few marathons that qualifies as a marathon major, an elite distinction that only the biggest and most competitive marathons qualify for. This was a big moment as this was the return of this race after the global pandemic, and on this day, an estimated 30,000 people lined up for this 26.2-mile race. This marathon brought out some of the greatest talents from across the world, and as the finish line quickly approached, one key athlete separated himself from everyone else in the field. This is Albert Korir from Kenya, and over these final few miles, he was striding away from everyone else with incredible ease. Now, notably, Korir was the second-place finisher back in the 2019 New York City Marathon, where he ran a time of 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 36 seconds, only finishing behind Geoffrey Kamworor of Kenya. But on this particular day, he won this race by almost 1 entire minute. With a finishing time of 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 22 seconds, Korir took down the second-placed athlete by 44 seconds, a dominant win by any definition. With half-marathon splits of 1:04:50, followed by a much faster second half in 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 32 seconds, Korir negative split this race and blew away everyone else in this marathon. This would ultimately be one of 5 top 3 placements that Korir has had in his marathon running background, and incredibly, all 5 of these finishes came from the New York City Marathon. Clearly, Korir has had many great showings on some of the biggest stages in distance running, and as a marathon major champion, his name has been synonymous with marathon success. Well, that was until 2026, because over these past 24 hours, news has been announced that Korir has unfortunately tested positive for a performance-enhancing drug, and this drug, as many have expected, was in fact EPO. Now, EPO is easily the most famous and most notorious drug in the endurance market. It strongly promotes the growth of red blood cells, which in turn drastically increases your body's oxygen-carrying capacity. Basically, this makes running or cycling for longer distances at a quicker pace much more tolerable, and for Korir, his use of EPO actually wasn't the typical EPO booster we have seen over the past few seasons, as his positive test was for something called CERA, C-E-R-A. This stands for Continuous EPO Receptor Activator, which, according to Google, is a third-generation EPO stimulant used for illicit performance-enhancing drugs and endurance sports. And as the name suggests, CERA is known for its chemically modified, long-acting implementation of EPO in the body. So compared to the typical dosage that we've seen over the past few years, this appears to be a much longer-lasting and potentially more potent form of EPO use. Now, according to the Athletics Integrity Unit that broke this news on Twitter, they still haven't announced where this doping violation actually took place. Some have speculated that it may have come from the Ottawa Marathon in Canada on May 25th of 2025, where Korir won this race in 2 hours and 8 minutes again. But based on recent updates from the Ottawa Marathon officials, no positive test came from this camp. The same thing has been happening with the New York City Marathon in 2025, as many have suggested that he tested positive after this race, and the news just broke 2 months later. Now, we still do not know exactly where this positive test has come from, but because Korir is a Kenyan runner, it is entirely possible that this test was a random out-of-competition test, as Kenya has been rapidly increasing their coverage for doping throughout the country. So potentially, this was an unexpected and unannounced test where an official showed up and asked for a sample. And if this was the case, then potentially Korir was caught off guard, which led to the positive result. This is still a breaking story, so that fact is still out there, but when it does get updated, which it will, we will make sure to let you all know where this positive test came from. Albert Korir is one of those names that always shows up to many big marathons, and he almost always competes quite well, but it does look a little suspicious that his only marathon major success has come from New York City. Potentially, there's a training cycle or even a doping regime where an athlete can peak at the right time and know how to cover their tracks. This definitely does not only apply to Albert Korir, as many athletes from many countries do in fact do this in order to avoid capture by the AIU, but it's just a working theory at the moment. But no matter what, this is another unfortunate event where an athlete with many great times and many great results is caught with using performance-enhancing drugs. 2026 has just started, and we've already lost a marathon major champion, and if this suspension turns into a ban, there is a high likelihood that he will be banned for at least 2 years. And I would imagine that this will be the case, as this is almost always what happens with a big ban like this. An athlete tests positive, and if they do in fact admit their doping, which they typically do, that would likely result in a 2-year ban. But if an athlete tampers with evidence or attempts to lie about what they've done, they could get anywhere from 4 to 6, even up to 10 years. Now, if an athlete does get banned for 10 years, that is essentially the end of their career. So in some respects, it behooves them to go ahead and admit their fault and be away from the sport just for a few seasons. And then after that, they come back and they can then compete in the big international races. It is very uncertain as to what will happen with Albert Korir, but one thing is for certain, many of his performances in the past will now be scrutinized to an even higher degree. For some, it is very, very hard to look past the fact that an athlete has been caught, and even though many of their records stand from the past, and many of their biggest marathon accomplishments still stand, it is understandable why many people believe that these times and performances were assisted with PEDs. Kenya has clearly been suffering from a doping crisis over the past few seasons, and Albert Korir's name added to that list only makes the country's crisis that much more severe. But it is important to remember that across the world, this issue still persists. It just so happens that other countries with access to better technology can also better hide the fact that they're using. Anyways, this was quite the high-profile athlete to be initially suspended, and potentially he will be banned based on this positive result. Anyways, I would love to hear from all of you about this topic. What do you think about Albert Korir? What do you think about his usage of Sarah? And what do you think is going to happen to this marathon major champion moving forward? Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time.
Albert Korir, first to break the tape here. He is the 2021 TCS New York City Marathon champion.
Or in 2020, excuse me, and that was